It was the first frost of the season, and the villagers of Weatherbrook knew what that meant. The smell of wet straw and burnt wood clung to the air like a warning, while a dull gray fog swallowed the narrow dirt paths that wound between the low timber homes. This year's harvest had been poor. The barley came in late, the beans barely sprouted, and the turnips had rotted in the ground from too much rain. Now the cold was creeping in, whispering its threats through every crack in the walls. A boy named Edric stood barefoot in the doorway of his family's hut, his woolen shirt thin and patched, his fingers tucked beneath his arms for warmth. He was only 9, but already understood more about suffering than most grown men do now. His mother, Alice, stirred a pot of boiled oats that had already been watered down 3 times, trying to stretch the meal across the next 2 days. She'd already given her portion to her children last night. This morning, she hadn't touched the spoon. There was no firewood left. They had burned the last of the dry kindling the night before. All that remained were damp sticks collected from under frozen hedgerows, and they hissed more than they burned. Smoke clung to the inside of the house, making Edric's eyes sting and his throat burn. But they needed heat, even bad heat. Outside, the air was sharp and silent, save for the distant cough of an old man or the bleating of a goat that hadn't been milked. Winter in the Middle Ages was never just about being cold. It was about hunger, sickness, and fear. The villagers didn't fear wolves as much as they feared running out of bread or having a tooth go bad with no healer nearby. Edric's father had died the previous winter. A fever took him within a week, and with him went the only strong hands that could dig through snow to find buried turnips or fix the leaking thatch. The entire household leaned on Alice now, and she leaned on faith and sheer will. The village priest, Father Oswin, often said winter was God's way of testing them. But the people didn't feel tested. They felt abandoned. Edric would lie awake at night, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that smelled of sheep, listening to his mother whisper prayers with chapped lips. The only heat came from the bodies packed beside him, his younger sister Maud, and a neighbor's orphan boy who now slept under their roof. Snow didn't fall prettily in Weatherbrook. It didn't float like lace or sparkle in the sunlight. It came down heavy like a burden and buried the world in silence. Doors froze shut, wells iced over, roads disappeared, horses died in their stalls, chickens froze on their perches, and always the fear, quiet and creeping like mold, settled into every heart. Would they make it a spring? Wool was precious, but not warm enough. Shoes, if you had them, might still split at the seams. Water froze in cups overnight, and hands, if not moving, would turn purple with cold. Men became desperate. Some stole. Some disappeared into the woods and were never seen again. But it wasn't all despair. There was love, too. Community. When one family's child took ill, others brought herbs or shared the last of their honey. When the baker's wife collapsed from hunger, a handful of villagers shared a single rabbit they'd trapped near the priory wall. These small moments of kindness lit up the long nights like candle flames. Yet, even kindness had limits. In years when the winters dragged on past Lent, when food ran out and frost clung to May flowers, the worst came out. People whispered of those who ate leather boots boiled in water, of mothers who buried children before dawn and said nothing, and of the abandoned who crawled into the woods and lay beneath trees, waiting. Edric had seen the look in his mother's eyes last winter when she thought he was sleeping. She stared at the ceiling, lips moving silently, and held her breath for long stretches as if testing how long she could go without. He never asked her what she thought about during those long silences. He didn't want to know. The man who kept the mill, old Reagan, said that the worst winter he could remember was the one when the river froze solid, and they had to break through ice with axes to get water. He said the snow piled so high it reached the tops of doors, and wolves wandered into the village looking for scraps. That winter, a woman from the next hamlet burned her own floorboards to keep her baby warm. When the baby died anyway, she walked into the woods barefoot, singing. In a world without insulation, central heating, or even thick glass windows, surviving the cold was a daily battle. And not just against temperature, against boredom, too. Days grew short. Nights dragged on. With little to do, minds wandered dark paths. People dreamt strange dreams, saw figures in the snow, and heard voices in the wind. That was why Father Oswin insisted on prayer every morning and again at dusk. He said it kept the darkness out. He said it reminded them that they were not beasts, no matter how cold or hungry they got. But the chapel itself was no warmer than the homes, and the stone floor made knees ache. Still they came. Even Edric, even when his lips were too numb to say the words. One evening, just before the solstice, something strange happened. A shadow was seen near the edge of the woods, a figure wrapped in furs, tall and unmoving. No one recognized it. It didn't come closer. It just stood, watching for hours. Then it was gone. Some said it was a traveler. Others said it was death. That night, the village dog howled nonstop. Fires wouldn't light. And in the morning, 3 hens were missing, with no prints in the snow. People grew quiet. Alice wouldn't let Edric outside after dark anymore. And Father Oswin's sermons turned grim, his voice sharper, as if he knew something but wouldn't say. The days grew darker, the cold bit deeper, and in the silence of snow and smoke, something ancient seemed to stir, a kind of knowing in the bones that winter wasn't just about weather. It was about survival in a world that had no pity. One evening, Edric woke to the sound of footsteps crunching outside their door. Slow, deliberate, not rushing, not lost, just walking. The fire had gone out, and everyone was asleep but him. The footsteps stopped right at the door. He held his breath, heart pounding. Then nothing. No knock. No voice. Just silence. When he told Alice in the morning, she didn't speak for a long time. Then she said something he didn't understand. Not everyone that walks in winter is alive. And from that moment on, Edric watched the woods differently. Because winter in the medieval world wasn't just brutal, it was haunted. And not everything that came with the snow left when it melted. But that is a story for another night. The cold didn't leave. Not even when the sun rose. Not even when the church bell rang faintly across the village, sounding more like a groan than a call to prayer. The frost clung to every surface, branches, rooftops, window slits, turning the world into something quiet and sharp, like it had been cut from ice. Edric walked carefully through the frozen mud path that led to the chapel, his thin boots soaked through, feet already numb before he reached the church steps. He wasn't alone. A few others, wrapped in cloaks and old wool, moved slowly in the same direction. They didn't speak. They didn't even look at one another. Words had become rare, save for warmth or warning. The kind of conversations they had now were short, tired things. Is she sick? Have you any broth? He didn't come home. In winter, even voices grew thin. Inside the chapel, the stone walls trapped the cold instead of keeping it out. Alice sat near the front, head bowed beneath her scarf. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a worn rosary, the beads smooth from years of desperate fingers. Edric sat beside her, his small body pressed close for shared warmth. Father Oswin's voice echoed from the altar, low and slow, carrying verses meant to comfort, but sounding more like warnings in the frozen air. Outside, a wind had started. It howled faintly through the trees and under the eaves. The sound wasn't unusual, but today it seemed to have a pattern, like it was saying something. Some of the villagers turned their heads when it picked up, their faces blank but their eyes wide, as if expecting to hear a name. After the service, a man from the edge of the village, Wulfric, stood up shakily and told the others that his youngest daughter hadn't woken up that morning. She had been coughing for days. Now she was still. They didn't need to ask what he meant. Father Oswin offered to come and bless the home, but Wulfric just shook his head. It's too late, he whispered, before walking out into the snow. That afternoon, Alice wrapped a crust of rye in cloth and sent Edric to take it to Widow Hilda, whose larder had been empty since the first frost. The walk wasn't far, but the wind bit hard, and Edric could barely keep his eyes open as he pushed through the snow that had started again, soft and slow like falling ash. When he arrived, he knocked twice. No answer. He tried the door, which groaned open. Inside, the fire was out, the room cold as the fields outside. Widow Hilda was sitting in her chair by the hearth, eyes closed, face still. For a moment, Edric thought she was sleeping. But something about the way she sat, so upright, so quiet, told him otherwise. He left the bread on the table and backed away. He didn't cry. In the village, death came without drama. It simply arrived, like a guest you hadn't invited but couldn't turn away. By the time he got home, his cheeks were bright red and raw from the cold. Alice rubbed them with cloth, trying to bring the color back. She didn't ask what he saw. She didn't need to. Alice had known what it looked like when someone had given up. That night, the wind grew louder. Even the animals stayed silent. Something in the air felt different, thicker. The fire wouldn't stay lit no matter how many times Alice tried. Maud whimpered in her sleep, clutching a worn doll made of scraps. Edric lay awake, staring at the dark beams above his head, listening to the strange sound outside. Not just wind, not just branches creaking. It was something else. A low shuffle, a crack, a thump, then silence. He sat up slowly. Across the room, Alice was awake too. She looked at him without speaking. Her face was pale in the moonlight. Carefully, she got up, took a log from the corner, and placed it beside the door. Not to block it, to use it. If it comes again, she whispered, you stay close to me. What is it? Edric asked, his voice barely audible. She didn't answer, just sat down and waited. The next morning, tracks were found by the well. Not the kind made by people. Not hooves, either. They were long, deep marks with claw-like indentations, spread far apart like something heavy had been dragging itself through the snow. A few of the men followed them toward the edge of the forest, but they stopped abruptly at the stream where the ice had broken. Whatever had made them had vanished or gone under. Talk of wolves came quickly, but no one had seen any, and the tracks didn't look like wolves. Some said bear. Others whispered older things. Stories that weren't told anymore because no one wanted to remember them. Edric heard the word frostwalker spoken by the old herbal woman, half to herself as she crushed dried roots by her hut. When he asked her what that was, she didn't reply. She just looked up at the sky and muttered something in Latin he couldn't understand. As the days passed, fear grew thicker than the snow. Chickens disappeared. A goat was found dead, ribs torn open, not eaten, just ruined. Then another girl went missing. They found only her shawl near the woods. That evening, the priest did not hold prayers. The chapel doors were shut, and a candle burned at every doorstep. Alice kept Edric and Maud close. They didn't go outside after dark anymore, not even to fetch water. Inside, the hut felt tighter, as if the walls were closing in. The cold became something alive, pressing against them, slipping through every gap, watching. Then came the night when the bell rang. Once, loud, echoing across the frozen roofs. No one rang the bell at night. Edric sat up in bed, heart pounding. Alice was already by the window, peering out. Snow fell fast now, sideways in the wind, and the village seemed buried in smoke and frost. Then came the scream. One sharp, terrified cry, cut short, somewhere near the chapel. Alice didn't wait. She grabbed Maud, wrapped her in furs, and pushed Edric toward the back wall, where a loose plank led into the neighbor's cellar. Stay here. Don't come out until I return. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were steady. No, Edric said. Let me go with you. You'll stay, she whispered, because I need you to keep Maud safe. That's what your father would have done. She didn't wait for more. The door creaked open, letting a breath of ice, and closed behind her. Edric held his sister tightly in the dark, trying to listen, trying not to cry. The minutes dragged. The snow roared, and nothing came. No more bells. No more screams. Just silence. Then footsteps. Slow. Crunching. Coming closer. And Edric realized they weren't coming from the front door. They were behind them. Inside. Still in the neighbor's cellar. Somewhere in the dark. And Alice hadn't come back. Edric didn't breathe. Not properly. He clutched Maud's tiny body tighter, her face buried in his chest, her soft breath warm against his skin. The steps were soft at first, like someone unsure where they were going. But they grew bolder, more deliberate, crunching against bits of ice and loose straw that covered the old cellar floor. His eyes adjusted slowly to the pitch black, but all he could see were shadows. Shapes within shapes. Maud stirred, but he hushed her quickly, pressing a trembling hand to the back of her head. He tried to tell himself it was nothing. Maybe it was a villager, someone hiding like them. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew it was wrong. No one walked like that. No one moved with that kind of slow patience, like they weren't just searching for something, but already knew exactly where it was. The sound stopped. Edric strained his ears. Nothing. No breath. No footsteps. Just a wet drip of melting frost from the beams above, ticking time like a slow clock. And then tap. A soft knock, not on the door, but against the wooden wall to their right. Maud whimpered again. Edric whispered, "Don't move. Don't speak. Not even a little." The tap came again. Then silence. And then, the worst sound yet, the groan of the wooden cellar door upstairs slowly creaking open. Whoever, or whatever, had come in from the snow was now between them and their only way out. Suddenly, a beam of light burst down from the cracks above. Someone had opened the trapdoor. "Edric!" A voice called, low and urgent. "Edric, are you there?" It was Alice. He almost shouted back, but caught himself. "Mother!" he whispered. "Come. Now. Quickly." The voice was hers, but something about it wasn't right. It was too calm, too smooth. Alice never spoke like that. Not in fear. Not in winter. "Say Maud's full name," Edric said suddenly. "Say it now." There was a pause. Then the voice, still hers, replied, "Don't be foolish, Edric. You're cold. Just come up now." That wasn't the answer. That wasn't Alice. He held Maud tighter and backed further into the corner of the cellar, heart pounding so loudly he could barely hear. Then the trapdoor slammed shut, and they were in the dark again. Minutes passed, maybe more. Edric had no idea how long. Time in the cold didn't move normally. It stretched and shrank. He just sat there, legs numb, cradling his sister, trying to stay awake, trying not to think. Eventually, Maud fell asleep. Edric didn't. Then, real footsteps. Rushing. Stumbling. The door above burst open again, and this time, when the trapdoor creaked, it flew open wide and real light poured down into the cellar. A familiar face peered in. It was Oswin, the priest. He was breathing hard, sweat frozen on his brow, holding a lantern in one hand and a short blade in the other. "Boy," he hissed. "Up. Now." Edric didn't question it. He hoisted Maud, who groaned softly in protest, and scrambled up the steps. Oswin yanked them both into his arms and pushed the trap shut behind them, bolting it with a long iron pin. "There's something in this village," Oswin muttered, more to himself than them. "Not wolf. Not man. It's old. Older than these woods. I've read of it. I thought it was legend." He didn't finish. He just pulled them both under his cloak and rushed them through the snow. Weatherbrook was no longer still. Windows were open. Doors swayed. Footprints crisscrossed in the snow, some human, some not. In front of the chapel, the statue of St. Bridget had fallen and cracked. Crows lined the rooftops, completely silent. "Where's my mother?" Edric asked breathlessly. "I don't know," Oswin said without turning. "But we'll find her." They ran toward the old priory, now mostly abandoned. Only the south hall had a roof, but it was stone, and stone meant strength. By the time they got inside, others had already gathered 10, maybe 12 people, wrapped in every scrap of cloth they owned, faces pale, eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Ildred the smith was there, his arm bloody, wrapped in torn linen. He didn't speak. Neither did Annis, the baker's wife, who sat rocking back and forth with an empty cradle at her feet. Oswin shut the door behind them and dropped the bolt. "No one leaves tonight," he said. Someone asked what they were hiding from, but Oswin didn't answer directly. Instead, he lit more lanterns and scattered salt across the floor in a wide circle. He placed a wooden cross in the center and asked everyone to sit close together. "We're not meant to be alone tonight," he said. "It comes when we're alone." No one questioned him. No one laughed. In a village where people barely spoke of the dead, no one dared challenge a warning like that. Edric sat with Maud beside him, their backs against the stone wall. He watched the others, their slow movements, their silent mouths. He knew what fear looked like. He had lived with it every winter. But this was different. This was the kind that made grown men cry without sound. Outside, the snow thickened. A soft moan rolled through the wind, not quite a voice, but almost. Then someone knocked. 3 slow raps on the door. Everyone froze. Oswin stood. "Who's there?" A pause. Then, a woman's voice. "It's Alice. Let me in." Edric jumped up, but Oswin blocked him. "Stay here." The voice came again, stronger now. "Edric, I found the others. You're safe. Just let me in. Say Maud's name." Edric whispered again. There was silence. Then the voice replied, "She's your sister, Edric. Don't be cruel." But still wasn't right. The tone was flat, rehearsed, like someone repeating a line they'd only heard once. Oswin crossed himself and picked up the blade again. "That's not your mother," he said. "Not anymore." The door rattled just once, then again, and then the worst thing of all, another knock came from the window behind them. Same voice, same words, but the window was on the opposite side of the room. Edric's skin turned to ice. Two voices now, identical, repeating her words again and again, knocking in perfect rhythm. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The room broke into panic. People cried. Someone began praying loudly. Oswin shouted over them all, "Do not move. Stay inside the circle." And just like that, silence. No more voices. No more knocks. Just the wind again, like none of it had ever happened. And in that silence, Edric finally understood. This winter wasn't like the ones before. This winter had teeth, and it hadn't come for the crops. It had come for them, and it was still out there, waiting. No one in the priory slept that night. Not truly. People closed their eyes, but the fear was so thick it pressed on their chests like a weight. Every creak in the old beams made heads snap around. Every gust of wind scratching against the shutters felt like fingers searching for a way in. Even the candles burned strangely, their flames flickering sideways though there was no draft. Edric sat with his back to the cold stone, arms wrapped around Maud. She had drifted into a shallow sleep, but even in rest, her body trembled. Oswin kept walking the edges of the circle of salt, whispering things in Latin that Edric didn't understand. A few others whispered prayers under their breath. A woman rocked slowly with her eyes wide open, mumbling her dead husband's name. By morning, the snow had stopped, but the world outside looked wrong. Not peaceful, empty. The air didn't move, not even in the trees. It was as if the whole village had been frozen in place by something older than winter itself. When Oswin finally opened the door, the light outside wasn't much brighter than inside. The sky was thick with gray clouds, low and heavy, like they were watching. Slowly, carefully, the group emerged. They carried whatever they had, knives, hatchets, even sharpened broom handles. They moved together, no one wandering off alone. The village was silent. The baker's door swung open in the wind. A dusting of snow had crept inside, covering the floor. There were no signs of a struggle, just absence. His wife, his daughter, all gone. Only their cloaks still hung on pegs by the hearth. A single loaf of bread sat half-sliced on the table, frozen solid. At the next cottage, they found something stranger. Footprints, bare human feet, dozens of them, trailing out from the front door and stopping suddenly in the snow, vanishing without direction. No drag marks, no struggle. Just a line of naked footprints leading into nothing. Oswin looked at them for a long time, then said quietly, "It's not hunger that took them." They searched for hours, but no one else was found. Not alive, not dead. It was as though half the village had simply walked out into the storm and vanished. And still no sign of Alice. Edric refused to give up. "She's alive," he said to Oswin. "I know she is." Oswin nodded, but said nothing. That afternoon, a strange mist rolled down from the hills. It was thick and slow, like smoke from a damp fire. And with it came the cold again, not just biting, but deep, as if it was seeping into the bones of the earth itself. They retreated back into the priory, lit every candle they had, and closed the doors once more. That night, the dreams began. Everyone had them. Dreams of long, black halls of ice, of faces beneath frozen water, of voices calling from the trees. Edric dreamt of his mother, standing in the woods, her hands outstretched, her face pale and blank as snow fell over her hair. She opened her mouth to speak, but only wind came out. He woke screaming, and he wasn't the only one. Others gasped awake around him, some sobbing, some sitting in stunned silence. Oswin sat by the window, eyes bloodshot, unmoving. "They're not dreams," he said. "They're messages." "What do they want?" someone whispered. Oswin turned to face them all. "To take what's left." The next morning, Edric made up his mind. He couldn't wait anymore. If his mother was alive, she needed help. And if she wasn't, he needed to know. He waited until Oswin left to check the chapel, then slipped out with Maud still asleep and wrapped in every bit of cloth he could find. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "I'll be back before the next fire burns out." The sky above was flat and gray. The air was too still. Not quiet, too still. Like something had stopped the world from breathing. Edric walked toward the house. His home. It stood crooked under the weight of snow, its roof sagging, the door barely hanging on. The inside was as cold as the outside. But something had changed. The table had been moved. The floor swept. The fire relit. And a bowl of soup, hot, sat steaming by the hearth. His heart stopped. "Alice," he whispered. Footsteps. Not behind him, above. He turned slowly, looking up toward the loft. The small ladder still hung there. And from the dark above, a voice called down. Edric, his mother's voice. But slower, deeper, almost distant. He gripped the ladder and climbed, each step creaking under his weight. The loft was dark. Only a sliver of light came from the cracks in the roof. At first, he saw nothing. Then her. She was sitting in the corner, back against the wall, eyes fixed on him. Her hair was messy, face pale, but she smiled. "You came back," she said softly. "Where did you go?" he asked. "Everyone's gone. They said something's out there, something bad." "I know," she said. "I saw it." He took a step closer. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, but something in her voice had changed. "I waited for you," she added. Then, behind him, a creak. He turned. Another figure stood at the top of the ladder. Identical face. Identical hair. Identical smile. "I waited for you," it said again. Edric froze. He looked back toward the first Alice, but she was gone. The loft was empty, and the thing at the ladder smiled wider than any person could. He stumbled back, heart hammering, slipped down the ladder, and ran. He didn't stop running until he reached the priory again. When Oswin saw his face, he knew something had changed. "What did you see?" the priest asked. But Edric couldn't answer. He was shaking too hard. That night, the mist returned. And this time, it didn't stay outside. It slipped through the cracks, curled beneath the doors, and sat above their heads as they slept. One by one, people began to whisper in their sleep, not in their own voices. And somewhere, out in the woods, something smiled. Winter wasn't just a season anymore. It was a presence, and it found its way in. Edric didn't speak much after that night. Not because he didn't want to, but because the words got stuck in his chest, frozen there like everything else. He stayed close to Maud during the days, rarely leaving her side, and refused to sleep without a candle burning beside him. The others noticed the change, but no one pressed him. They all carried their own weight now. Everyone had seen something or lost someone, and some weren't sure which was worse. The priory walls held strong against the wind, but not against the fear. That crept in like smoke, quiet and choking. Oswin grew quieter too. He still led prayers, but not as often. He spent most of his time now in the corner near the broken stained glass window, flipping through brittle old books that no one else could read. Whenever someone asked what he was looking for, he only said, "The beginning. If we can find how it started, maybe we can find how it ends." One afternoon, as the gray light filtered through the clouds and the snow began to fall again, Edric sat near the hearth with Maud, who was drawing pictures in the ash with her finger. She drew houses with pointed roofs, stick figures with big eyes, and odd shapes he didn't recognize. When he asked her what they were, she pointed to the last one, a tall, narrow figure with arms that hung too low and no face. She said, "He watches from the trees." Edric felt his chest tighten. "Did you see him in a dream?" She shook her head. "Not in a dream." He looked over at Oswin, who had been listening quietly. The priest gave Edric a slow, knowing nod. Later, as night fell again, Oswin finally gathered the small group of survivors near the altar. The candles flickered on the stone, casting long shadows against the walls. Edric sat in the back, wrapped in a blanket, holding Maud's hand. Everyone listened because by now, silence had become too dangerous. They're old stories. Oswin began, his voice low, steady. Much older than this village. Older than the church. Stories told by the first people who lived in these hills. Stories about winters that never ended. About creatures that walked with the storms, feeding on warmth and memory. No one interrupted. Not even the smith, who usually scoffed at such things. They believed that the cold was not just a season, Oswin continued. It was a spirit, a hunger. They called it by many names, but one has survived in whispers, Tharn, the hollow cold. A presence that comes not with the first frost, but with the last hope. He looked around at the pale faces. They said Tharn doesn't kill the way wolves or men do. It empties people, slowly. It takes their warmth, their memories, their names. And what's left still walks, still speaks. But it's not them anymore. A woman in the corner shivered and began to cry softly. Oswin looked down at the book in his lap, its pages yellowed and torn. There are signs, he said, mirrored voices. The smell of smoke in places where there's no fire. Shadows where there should be none. And dreams, shared dreams. Edric swallowed hard. He remembered the figure in the woods, his mother's voice in two places at once, and the way Maud's drawing had no face. But how do we stop it? Someone whispered. Oswin didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was almost a whisper. I don't know. That night, no one slept again. The next day, Edric followed Oswin outside. He didn't tell anyone. He just waited for the priest to gather his things, salt, herbs, bits of iron, and slip quietly out the priory door. Edric followed at a distance, careful not to make noise in the snow. Oswin moved with purpose, past the well, past the chapel, and up the path that led to the old stone circle near the edge of the forest. The place was ancient, older than the village, marked by tall gray stones that leaned like tired giants. Edric had been told not to go there since he was little. People said the stones whispered during storms, that animals wouldn't go near them. Oswin stepped into the center and knelt. He began drawing shapes in the snow, murmuring words Edric couldn't hear. The wind blew harder around the stones, yet the center stayed still, unnaturally still. Then a sound, a long, low hum, barely a sound at all, like something deep beneath the earth was stirring. Oswin stopped. He looked up, suddenly alert, and turned in Edric's direction. You shouldn't be here, he said calmly. I followed you, Edric replied. I want to help. The priest studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Help means understanding what we face. But some knowledge isn't safe. I already saw it, Edric whispered. It took her face. Oswin's eyes darkened. Then you've seen more than most. And it means it's marked you. They sat in silence for a long moment. The wind circled the stones like a breath held too long. Then Oswin stood. Come, we shouldn't stay here. As they turned back, toward the village, Edric looked over his shoulder. One of the stones had a dark streak along its base, like a burn mark. And in the snow beside it, a handprint. Small, too small for an adult. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon behind thick clouds, a strange horn echoed across the valley. No one knew where it came from, but every face turned toward the woods. And deep beneath the frost, the earth trembled just enough to knock a cup off a table. The next morning, 3 more villagers were gone. No signs of struggle, just vanished. Their blankets still warm, their boots untouched. And etched into the frost on the inside of the priory window, scratches in a pattern. It looked like a door, but none that any of them had ever seen before. The frost wouldn't melt, no matter how long they burned the fire. And in the center of the door's shape, a face began to form in the ice. But no one dared look too long, not even Edric, because something inside him knew. It was watching back. The frost didn't fade. Not that day, not the next. It clung to the inside of the priory window like a warning no one wanted to read, like a word left unsaid but always felt. The face in the ice, part formed quiet and oddly still, wasn't something anyone spoke of aloud. But every person in that room knew it was there, knew it was changing, bit by bit, as if whatever was behind, it was waking slowly, stretching, learning. Maud stopped drawing. She stopped speaking, too. She spent most of her time tucked in Edric's blanket, watching the candles burn down with tired eyes. When he tried to talk to her, she'd only say, "He's getting closer," then go quiet again. The others in the priory were fraying around the edges. You could see it in their movements, in the way they barely spoke to each other anymore, how they walked more slowly, how they all stared at nothing for longer than they should. Hunger was part of it, but it wasn't just that. The cold had gotten into their bones and deeper than that, into their thoughts. Some of them had started sleepwalking. One woman woke up barefoot outside with her eyes wide open and no memory of leaving the room. A man began muttering about lanterns buried in the snow. And Oswin, he started keeping a blade under his robes, even when he slept. Edric stayed busy gathering twigs for fire, drying scraps of cloth, and watching for movement in the woods. He told himself the work mattered, that it was keeping him sharp, but in truth, he was just trying to stay awake. The dreams had returned, and in them, the voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It was speaking full sentences, familiar ones, in the voice of people he loved. And always, at the end of the dream, that door, etched in frost, stood open, and someone was walking through it. Oswin finally sat him down one afternoon, when the wind was quieter and the rest of the group slept in scattered corners. "You've seen more than you should," the priest said. "I didn't ask to," Edric replied. Oswin nodded, his breath fogging the air. "That's the way of most things worth knowing." There was a pause. Edric looked toward the window, where the frost had spread. The face and the eyes had changed again. It was clearer now, the eyes deeper, the mouth wider. "What does it want?" Edric asked. "To be let in." "Why us?" Oswin looked tired, older than before, his hands shaking slightly. "Because we're the last warm thing in the valley. Everything else is already cold." He slid a bundle across the table toward Edric. Inside was a small metal pendant, shaped like a circle with jagged lines through it. It was old, dark, worn smooth in places by time. "This is elder iron," he said. "The old ones believed it kept spirits at bay. Wear it. Don't take it off. Not for a second." Edric put the pendant around his neck, the metal cold but oddly comforting. "Will it stop it?" "No," Oswin said, "but it might buy you time." That night, the winds returned. Harsher, not just sound but force. The priory groaned under the weight of it. Snow blew in through the cracks. The shutters slammed open and shut, and in the corner, a candle went out, though no one had touched it. When Edric checked the window, the frost door had changed again. It was no longer just a drawing. It had depth. You could see inside it. And in that space, something was moving. The panic began quietly. A woman insisted her child was whispering in her sleep in another tongue. A man tried to open the priory door, swearing he saw his brother standing outside, despite the fact that his brother had been missing for days. It took 3 people to drag him back from the threshold. Oswin gathered everyone again. This time his hand shook badly. "We have to stop it before it fully crosses, before it opens the door. If it finds its way through completely, we won't just freeze. We'll become it." "How we stop it?" someone asked. Oswin's eyes flicked toward Edric. "I think he already knows." Edric looked around, startled. "Me? You've seen it the most. It's drawn to you. That's why it showed you your mother." "I don't understand what it wants," Edric whispered. Oswin stepped closer. "You don't need to. You just need to close the door." Edric looked toward the frost-covered window again. The face was gone now, and the door? Open, just a little. That night, Edric couldn't sleep, though his body begged him to. Maud had started shivering again, even wrapped in furs. The priory was too quiet. Everyone was either too scared to speak or too tired to care. Outside, the snow fell straight down, too perfect, too clean. At some point, Edric rose and walked to the window. The frost had changed once more. This time, it didn't show the door. It showed himself, standing in the snow, alone. His breath caught. Behind him in the reflection, something moved. He turned. Nothing. But he knew. Deep in his chest, he knew. The thing was inside now. It didn't need the storm anymore. It had found a way through. And the last safe place in the village was no longer safe. Somewhere in the dark, the door was opening all the way, and someone was about to walk through. Edric didn't go back to sleep after that, not even when Maud stirred beside him, whispering soft nonsense in her dreams. Not even when the fire was stoked again and the others settled into the illusion of rest. His eyes stayed fixed on the window, on that layer of frost, now curling at the edges like breath on a mirror. The image of himself standing in the snow was gone, but the sense of being watched wasn't. It lingered in the air, in his chest, behind his eyes. In the dim candlelight, he heard Oswin moving near the back wall. The priest hadn't slept either. He was bent over a table now, tracing something onto a worn sheet of parchment with shaking hands. Edric moved closer, slow and quiet. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Oswin glanced up, eyes red from exhaustion. "The old circle," he said. "From memory. From the book. I think it's more than a place. It's a lock." Edric frowned. "A lock for what?" "For whatever's trying to come through." The lines on the parchment were strange, spirals inside of spirals, pointed stars, runes Edric didn't recognize. The kind of symbols the villagers had always whispered about, but never talked of too loudly. Witches' signs, some had said. Protection marks, others claimed. Whatever they weren't meant for decoration. "We can't trap it forever," Oswin continued. "But maybe we can stop it from fully opening the gate. If we close the circle again." Edric's stomach turned. "We have to go back there." "To the standing stones," Oswin nodded. "Tonight, before the next shadow comes." They didn't tell the others. Not yet. Most were too scared to move, let alone help. Some were fading, slowly, yes, but clearly. Their speech slurred, their eyes distant, as if part of them had already been pulled beyond the door in the frost. Edric and Oswin prepared quietly. A bundle of salt, a jar of ash, the elder iron pendant, which Edric now wore tucked beneath his shirt like armor. Maud woke as they moved. She sat up in the candlelight, her face pale and eyes wide. "You're going," she said softly. Edric knelt beside her, just for a little while. She clutched his arm, small fingers digging into his coat. "He's waiting for you." "I know," Edric whispered. "That's why I have to go." Maud didn't cry. She just looked down, then said, "Don't look at his face. That's how he gets in." Those words stayed with Edric as they stepped into the snow again. The cold hit like a slap to the chest, dry and sharp. The mist hadn't returned, but the quiet was worse than before. No wind, no birds, no movement at all. Even the trees seemed to lean back, holding their breath. They walked quickly, staying close, speaking only when they had to. The snow crunched beneath their boots like glass. The sky was a pale gray above, offering no help, no light. And when they finally reached the stone circle, the shadows around the rocks seemed to breathe. The stones loomed tall and silent. Whatever warmth had once existed in the air was gone entirely. Even Oswin paused before entering the ring. "You see them?" he asked. Edric nodded. "Shadows. Not from moon, not from the firelight." They clung to the base of each stone, thin, reaching, almost curious. Like they were listening. Oswin stepped forward, and Edric followed. He began redrawing the pattern from his memory, tracing the lines with salt and ash between the stones, muttering words under his breath. Edric stood in the center, holding the lantern, watching the trees. That's when he saw it again. The figure. Same as in the frost. Tall. Wrong. No face. Just the shape of one. It stood just beyond the edge of the circle, half shrouded in the drifting snow. Not moving. Not even blinking. Watching. Edric gripped the lantern tighter. "Oswin," he whispered. "It's here." Oswin didn't stop drawing. "Don't move. Don't speak to it. Just hold the light." But the thing took a step closer. Snow didn't crunch beneath it. It left no prints. It was as if it wasn't walking at all, just appearing one frame at a time, closer and closer. "I need more time," Oswin said. "I don't think we have time." Then a sound. Behind them. A new voice. Soft. Familiar. Edric. He turned before he could stop himself. His mother stood at the edge of the circle. No snow on her. No breath in the cold. Just standing. Smiling. "You came back," she said. Oswin grabbed Edric's shoulder. "That's not her. Look away." But Edric's legs locked. His mouth opened. I have to know," he whispered. "No," Oswin said. "You already know. You just don't want it to be true." His mother stepped closer. "It's warmer now. I found the others. They're waiting for you. Come and see." Behind her, shadows moved. Dozens of them. Figures. Faces. Some Edric recognized. Some he didn't. I miss you, she whispered. I miss you too, Edric said. Then the circle flared. The salt lines lit like fire, glowing red and gold in the snow. Oswin finished the last mark with a shaking hand, and the air inside the stones suddenly pulsed, like something had been sealed. The figure at the edge, his mother, or what wore a face, froze. The smile vanished. The shape shimmered, almost lost its form, then vanished like smoke in wind. The other figures followed, one by one. Gone. The forest sighed. Edric collapsed to his knees. Oswin slumped beside him, exhausted. It won't hold forever, he said. I know, but it's a start. They sat there for a long time, lantern flickering. The frost hadn't left. The cold hadn't broken. But for the first time in weeks, something else had stopped moving. The door wasn't open anymore, but neither was it gone. And deep in Edric's chest, he knew, one day it would knock again. The walk back to the priory felt longer than before. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every creak of the trees a whisper behind their backs. Edric didn't speak, and Oswin only coughed now and then, leaning heavily on a branch he'd turned into a makeshift staff. The air hadn't warmed. If anything, the cold felt different now, more personal, like it had noticed them and was watching quietly, waiting for its next chance. When they finally reached the old stone building, the door was ajar. Not wide, just enough to make Edric freeze. He looked at Oswin, who nodded silently, then stepped forward and pushed it open. Inside, the candles had all gone out. A strange gray smoke hung in the air, not thick, not choking, but just enough to make the room look blurred at the edges. Someone had knocked over one of the benches, and faint marks trailed across the floor like something had been dragged. "Ma!" Edric called, voice cracking. No answer. He rushed inside, past the fire pit, to the small corner where she usually slept. Her blanket was there, still warm. Her little doll lay on its side in the straw. But she was gone. She wouldn't have left, he said, panic rising in his chest. She wouldn't leave me. Oswin was already checking the doors. The back one had been unbolted. The snow just outside was disturbed. Light footprints, small, scattered. Then beside them, others, larger, bare, deep. She was taken, Edric whispered. Oswin didn't deny it. He just looked toward the woods. They followed the trail, but it didn't last long. The snow picked up again, swallowing the prints like it was protecting something. After just a few hundred steps, the tracks vanished completely. No sign of Maud. No sign of anyone. Edric dropped to his knees in the snow. He didn't cry. He wanted to, but the fear pressed harder than the sorrow. It was like the cold inside him had spread, dulling the edges of everything. We'll find her, Oswin said quietly. But we need help. From who? Everyone's gone or hiding. Oswin stared into the woods. Not everyone. That night, they returned to the village. Not to the priory, but to a house near the stream. It belonged to the herbal woman, Enna. She was old, with long white hair and eyes like damp stones. Most people avoided her. Said she knew too much. Said she could see things that weren't hers to see. When Oswin knocked, she answered before the second tap. You should have come sooner, she said not kindly. It's already begun to root. Inside her home, the air smelled of dried herbs and old smoke. Pots boiled without flames beneath them. The walls were covered in markings, some like the ones Oswin had drawn, others stranger, more primal. Enna sat them down without asking, then pulled a small bundle from beneath the floorboards. Inside was a piece of cloth, a child's scarf. Maud's. She came here, Edric whispered, grabbing it. She was brought, Enna corrected. It used her to leave a message. What kind of message? Oswin asked. Enna didn't answer right away. She poured something dark and bitter into clay cups and handed them over. She's still alive, she finally said, but not untouched. What does that mean? Edric asked. It means she saw him, and he saw her. That leaves a mark. Oswin sipped from the cup and winced. You said it's rooting. What's rooting? Enna stood, moved to the wall, and pulled back a rag that covered a rough carving. A door, not unlike the one in the frost, but carved deep into the wood, with tendrils, black, branching veins, spreading out from its edges like roots from a dying tree. Edric stared at the carving, and something inside him twisted. He didn't know how or why, but he recognized it. Not just the shape, it was the feeling, like something had already brushed against his thoughts and left this image behind. Enna pointed to the veins. This is what happens when the gate isn't sealed fully. It begins to root into people, into places, into the land itself. And once it takes hold, it spreads. It doesn't need fire or blood. It uses cold and silence. And memory. Oswin looked grim. So Maud is part of this now. She's not lost, Enna said, her tone softening. But she's closer to the door than you are. And if she gets pulled any further, she won't come back the same. If at all. Edric's hands clenched around the scarf. Tell me what to do. Enna poured ash onto the table and began to draw in it with her finger. Symbols, spirals, a small door in the center. There's still time, but not much. The old gate, the real one, it's buried beneath the village. Always has been. Covered over. Forgotten. That frost you saw in the priory? That's just a shadow of what's waiting below. Oswin leaned in. The real gate? You mean it's physical? More or less, Enna said. It's a crossing, not just between worlds, but between what we were and what we could become if we forget who we are. That's why it uses memory, familiar faces, known voices. If it can trick you into stepping through, you become part of it. And when enough people do, it won't need to hide anymore. The words sat like stones in Edric's stomach. He thought of his mother's voice, how warm it had sounded, how close. He nearly followed it once. Where is it? He asked. Enna looked at him. Below the well. The oldest one. Beneath the chapel ruins. Edric stood. Then that's where I'll go. You can't go in alone, Oswin said. We'll need something more. Protection, weapons. No weapon will help you down there, Enna said. But there's one thing that might hold it back long enough. She turned and retrieved a heavy, cloth-wrapped object from a locked box. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small wooden idol. It was simple. Two figures standing back to back, hands clasped, but its surface was scorched black and pulsing faintly with warmth. This is called a memory ward, she said. It binds your past to your present. As long as you carry it, your thoughts are your own. But if you drop it, if you let it go, you'll forget everything. Even your name. Edric took it carefully, the wood strangely warm against the cold of his hands. I won't let go. You say that now, Enna murmured. But the deeper you go, the harder it'll be to remember why you went in at all. The next day, they returned to the chapel ruins. No one followed them. The priory had emptied during the night. Only silence greeted them now. The snow was deeper. The doors hung wide. No footprints, just stillness and the wind and that distant humming cold that no longer felt like weather. Beneath the chapel, the old well sat like a wound. Its stones were cracked, the wooden cover half-rotted. Oswin pried it open with a crowbar. The air that spilled out was damp and dark and smelled like moss and old iron. A rope hung down into nothing. Enna had given them only one warning. Don't speak to anything down there, no matter what it sounds like. If it knows your name, it can follow you back. Oswin went first, lantern tied to his belt, the rope groaning as he descended. Edric followed, clutching the memory ward close to his chest. Each step down took him deeper into a darkness that felt thicker than night. The walls were slick, the air stale, and too still. Somewhere far below, water dripped, slow, deliberate. At the bottom, the ground opened into a tunnel carved from stone and ice. Not built, carved, as if something had moved through it long ago and melted the walls smooth with its own body. The path twisted and narrowed, then opened again into a wide chamber. At the center stood the gate. It wasn't made of wood or metal. It was a thing of ice and bone and shadow. Its frame pulsed with a dull blue light. Its surface rippled like water frozen mid-motion. And beyond it, nothing. Not blackness. Just nothing. Edric could barely breathe. Something moved behind the gate. Slow. Deliberate. He didn't see it. He felt it, like something watching him from behind his own eyes. Then a voice echoed. Edric. Maud's voice. He turned, but she wasn't behind him. Edric, help me. The voice came again from the gate. He stepped closer. Don't, Oswin warned. But it's her. It's not. That thing knows what you need to hear. Edric clutched the idol harder. His fingers were numb. Then the voice changed. "Do you remember the song Mother used to hum?" It asked, so soft it was barely a whisper. Edric froze. That song. Only he and Maud knew that song. "She's alive," he said. "She might be," Oswin said. "But that doesn't mean she's here." The gate shimmered. Then a shape formed on the other side. Maud, or something that looked like her. She stood still, eyes wide. Reaching out. "Edric," she said again, and he took a step forward. Then another. The idol slipped in his hand. For a second, he forgot what he was doing, forgot why he was there, forgot who he was. But Oswin grabbed his arm. "Hold on," he growled. "Hold on to who you are." Edric blinked. The cold rushed in. The real cold. Not the whispering kind, but the kind that reminded him he was still here. He stepped back. The gate pulsed, almost like it was angry. The figure of Maud flickered. And for a brief second, just a flicker, he saw the truth. Her face was empty. Just hollow skin stretched over nothing. And behind her, dozens more. All watching. All waiting. Edric turned to Oswin. "We need to close it." Oswin nodded. "But not today. Today we survive." And together, they began to climb. But the voice from the gate followed. Soft. Patient. "Next time," it whispered. "Next time you won't turn away." And somewhere deeper still, something smiled. The climb back up the well was slower this time. Not just because the rope was wet and the stone walls slick, but because something had changed inside Edric. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was a pressure, a weight behind his thoughts, like a memory trying to come loose. The image of Maud's face, no, the thing wearing her face, kept rising in his mind. That hollow skin, those empty eyes, the soft voice that knew the old lullaby. It haunted him more than anything he'd seen in the woods, more than the frost face at the window or the bare footprints that vanished in the snow. Because for one awful second, he'd wanted to believe it was her. When they reached the surface, the wind had shifted again. Sharper now, and carrying something new, ashes. Not much, just a faint sour scent in the air. Edric's eyes followed it, and that's when he saw it. Smoke, coming from the direction of the priory. He ran before Oswin could stop him, heart pounding harder than his boots in the snow. The frost crunched louder than ever. The trees leaned heavier, and the sky, already dim, looked like it had dropped another shade darker. The building came into view, and with it chaos. Half of the roof had collapsed. Smoke poured from the chapel side, where the sacred books had been kept. The benches had been pulled apart, tossed into a pile in the center of the room. Fire had scorched the walls, but no one was fighting it. There were people standing around the flames. Too still, too silent, watching it burn like they didn't see it all. Edric stopped just outside the threshold. The smell hit him hard now. Not just smoke, wax, char, and something sweeter, wrong, like burning herbs and old meat. Oswin arrived a few seconds behind him. He took one look at the scene and whispered, "They've been touched." The people didn't move as Edric stepped closer. One man turned, face blank, eyes milky. Another woman had blood at her ears, hands clasped in prayer, but murmuring words that weren't Latin. Not even a language Edric recognized. They opened something, Oswin said. Something let them think it was holy. Near the fire, something moved. A girl, small, curled up under a broken table. "Ma!" Edric ran to her and knelt down. Her eyes opened slowly, too slowly, but they focused on him. "You came back," she whispered. He hugged her tight, pulled her into his coat. She was cold, but not dead. Not empty. "She's still in there," he said. "Not for long." Oswin murmured, "This place is tainted now. We can't stay." As if hearing his words, one of the villagers turned toward them fully. His mouth opened slowly, too wide, and something like steam poured out. Not smoke, not breath, just cold. Pure, unnatural cold. He stepped forward. So did the others. "Go," Oswin said. They ran, back through the snow, carrying Maud. Her body was light, too light, like something had already taken part of her with it. She didn't speak again, just pressed her face into Edric's chest and shivered. The woods closed in around them. But something else followed. Not footfalls, not voices. Breath, like the air itself, was chasing them, pushing them toward the edge of exhaustion. They made it to Enna's house just before dark. She opened the door before they could knock. Her eyes didn't widen at the sight of Maud. She just stepped aside and said, "It's almost time." Inside, the fire was strong, the walls covered in fresh markings. More herbs burned. The whole place smelled of salt and pine and smoke. Enna took Maud into her arms and examined her eyes, her pulse, her breath. "She's slipping," she said. "You bought time, but not much." Edric sat down, his hands trembling. "What do we do?" "We stop it at the root," she said. "Tonight." Oswin looked up. "We go back." "No," Enna said. "This time we finish it." They gathered what they had: symbols, charms, old iron blades, and the memory ward, which Edric kept tighter than ever now. Enna carried a box, locked and bound in red twine. She didn't say what was in it, just that it would be needed at the end. As they left, Maud opened her eyes. "Don't forget," she whispered. "When the door speaks, it doesn't lie. It only shows what you wish was true." Those words burned into Edric's mind as they approached the ruins again. The old well stood waiting, mouth open like it had always been hungry and finally remembered how to eat. This time, all three of them climbed down. The tunnel was colder than before. The light from their lanterns barely reached the walls. The air pressed inward, heavy, like a thick blanket of snow. At the end of the path, the gate still stood, but it was different now. Wider, thinner, and this time it pulsed with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Behind it, shapes moved. Not flickers, not illusions. People, faces half-lit by flickering frostlight. Some were strangers, some were familiar, and one was Edric's mother. She stepped closer. So did others. A man who looked like Oswin's brother. A child who looked like Enna's daughter. All lost long ago. None of them blinked. None of them breathed. But all of them smiled. The cold deepened, and the door began to open. Just a little. Just enough for the whisper to crawl through again. "Come home." And this time, it was all their voices at once. Everyone they had ever lost. Everyone they had ever loved. Calling from the other side of winter. Tools. Edric's breath caught in his throat. His mother's voice wrapped around him like wool on a bitter day. Soft, warm, true. For a second, it pulled something loose in him. The part that still wanted to believe she was alive. That she was waiting for him. That he could step through the frostlight and fall in her arms and forget the snow, the fear, the cold. But even as his heart lurched toward the illusion, his fingers clutched tighter around the memory ward. The warmth of the wood grounded him, reminded him of the truth. He took a step back. The smile on his mother's face faltered. Only for a moment. Then it twisted subtly. The eyes sharpened. The body leaned forward, just slightly, like it had to adjust to stay inside the shape it wore. Behind her, the others swayed, as if caught in a breeze that didn't touch the air around them. The figure who looked like Oswin's brother blinked, once slow, and reached a hand through the rippling surface of the gate. Frost poured from his fingertips. Not fast, just enough to begin coating the stones beneath their feet. "We need to finish the seal," Oswin said, his voice low and tight. "Now." Enna knelt in the snow-dusted floor and opened her box. Inside was a dagger, curved like a crescent moon, carved from a metal Edric didn't recognize. It shimmered like no light touched it. She handed it to Oswin, then pulled out a bundle of dried leaves and a vial of thick, black liquid. "Everyone makes a mark," she said, "with blood, on the stones. The gate was opened by memory. It has to be sealed by it too." Oswin didn't hesitate. He pricked his palm with the dagger and pressed it to the carved stone closest to the gate. The rock hissed. A line of warmth flared where the blood touched. Then he passed the dagger to Edric. Edric stared at it for a moment. It felt heavier than it looked. Not just weight, but purpose. He glanced up at the frost gate. His mother's figure was closer now, almost at the threshold. The false warmth in her face had melted into something colder, hungrier. He could hear the sound now, not just the voice. A low thrumming, like breath behind a wall. He cut his hand. The sting was sharp but real. He pressed his palm to the stone. Another flare of light, deep orange, like an ember in a dying fire. Enna followed, her mark the last. The symbols on the ground began to glow faintly. The air grew warmer, only slightly, but enough to fog their breath again. Enough to remind them that they were still alive. Then the gate screamed. It didn't make a sound like wind or a voice. It shrieked like ice cracking across a deep lake, a sound that went through the bones. That made Edric fall to his knees and cover his ears. Shapes inside the gate began to thrash. Faces blurred. The voices multiplied, twisting now, panicked, furious. "You don't belong here," they cried. "Let us in. Don't turn away." The figures lunged. The gate pulsed. The frost surged forward, wrapping around Edric's ankles, pulling toward his legs. He screamed, but Inna threw a ring of salt around him just in time. The frost stopped. "Hist! Stay inside the circle," she ordered. "They'll try to take your warmth first." Oswin stumbled toward the edge of the chamber and began lighting small iron candles around the seal. One by one, they flared orange, then red, then blue. The light held the frost back. The gate shuddered. Its surface rippled with wild energy now. The calm was gone, and from within the heart of the gate, something began to press outward. Not a person, a shape, tall, thin, featureless. The same figure Edric had seen in the woods, in the frost, in the dreams. It wasn't wearing a face this time. It didn't need to. They all knew what it was. Tharn, the hollow cold. It stepped closer to the inside edge of the gate. Its body was made of shifting ice and black smoke, its arms longer than they should have been. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were twin orbs of pale light like moons behind fog. "Give her to me," it said. Its voice was nothing like Maud's, or his mother's, or anyone's. It was the absence of sound, the way silence feels after something terrible. "She's mine," it said again. She followed. She was taken. Edric spat, rising to his feet. "She came," Tharn whispered. "She heard me. She listened." The gate cracked at the edges, not breaking open, but weakening. The ritual was working. She believed it hissed. Inna was already pouring the black liquid across the final seal lines. Smoke rose where it touched the stone. "Finish it," she shouted to Oswin. But Oswin had stopped moving. He stood still, his eyes wide. And from the gate, a new figure stepped forward. His brother, not the spirit, his asterisk brother. Alive, breathing. "You left me," the man said. Oswin's lips parted. I saw you die. I waited for you," the brother said. "You're not real," Inna snapped. "I am," the figure said calmly, eyes locked on Oswin. "Come closer, and you'll see." Oswin took a step. "Don't," Edric called out. "It's not him." But Oswin didn't hear, or didn't want to. He stepped past the outer ring of light. The frost lunged. It climbed his legs in seconds, freezing his robe to the ground, his arms to his sides. Oswin screamed once, and then was silent. His brother vanished like smoke. Edric fell back into the circle, breathing hard, shaking. "Can we still finish it?" he asked. Inna nodded grimly. "We have to." She grabbed the curved dagger and stepped into the heart of the seal. Tharn shrieked again, this time a true scream. It reached past the stone and salt, past the charm lines. It went straight into the soul. Edric felt his mind bending under the pressure, like his memories were being stirred. He thought of Maud, of his mother's lullaby, of holding a warm loaf of bread once, laughing by a fire. He clutched the memory ward tighter, and the memory stayed. The gate began to fracture. Cracks raced across its surface like lightning in a storm. Tharn slammed a hand against the barrier, and it bent. Just a little, just enough for him to look through, right into Edric's eyes. "I remember you," it said. "You're already half mine." Then it smiled, and behind it, more shadows surged forward, dozens of them, try to push through the gate. Inna raised the blade. The final chant began, and Edric knew this was it. Everything was about to break. Inna's voice grew louder as the words of the chant rose into the air, a string of forgotten language that sounded more like wind through dead branches than any human speech. The dagger she held pulsed with strange heat, its curved edge glowing faintly. Around them, the seals lit one by one, burning with orange light against the frost-covered floor. Cracks spread wider across the gate's shimmering surface. The figures trapped behind it began to panic. Some clawed, some whispered, and others simply stared with eyes that didn't blink, waiting for something Edric didn't yet understand. Then, without warning, The light from one of the seal points sputtered out. It was fast. A gust of cold wind blew through the chamber, unnatural precise, and snuffed the flame like someone had pinched it with icy fingers. Inna stopped mid-chant, eyes wide. "No," she whispered. "Not yet, not now." The second candle went out, then the third. One by one, the iron candles, meant to trap the cold, meant to hold the gate in place, were extinguished. Edric backed up, dragging Maud with him. She was shivering hard now, lips blue, murmuring something under her breath that made no sense. "It knows," Inna said through gritted teeth. "It knows what we're doing. It's fighting back." Edric looked down. The circle of salt he had stepped into before was gone, blown away. The frost had returned, crawling across the floor like spilled ink. It was circling again, surrounding them, changing the shape of the chamber. They were being cut off. "Light them again," Edric shouted. "I can't," Inna snapped. "The flame won't hold. Not with him this close." Tharn's hand pressed against the surface of the gate. The cracks deepened. His form was still shifting, made of smoke and snow and shadow, but behind the shape of his face, something darker moved. Not a being, a presence, something that had no name, but felt like it had always been there, hiding beneath the ice, waiting for someone to listen. "Let me show you," Tharn said softly. His voice came from everywhere. It echoed through the stone walls and down into the marrow of their bones. "Let me show you what comes after the cold." Then came the second twist. The gate, despite all the rituals, the seals, the chants, didn't collapse. It opened. Just a crack. Enough for something to pass through. But what stepped out wasn't Tharn. It was Oswin, or at least what looked like him. Edric recoiled, his breath catching. No, that's not possible. Oswin's face was the same. His eyes tired and kind. His robe torn from the frost. But his skin was pale, too pale. Almost gray. And when he spoke, it was his voice, but colder. "Hollow, you didn't save me," he said to Edric. "I tried," Edric whispered. "You stepped too far. You watched," Oswin said. "You let it take me." Inna reached for her blade, but Oswin raised a hand, and the frost surged toward her like a wave. She slammed to the ground, gasping, the knife sliding from her grip. "No!" Edric lunged for the blade, skidding across the frozen floor. He barely managed to catch it before the ice reached him. Oswin, Tharn's puppet, stepped closer. "You don't understand. You've been told half-truths. There's no door. I'm the door." Behind him, the frost gate widened just slightly. A pulse of cold air roared through the chamber. The ground cracked. More shadows spilled out. Not people, not spirits, just forms. Like memories without bodies. Like thoughts that had grown teeth. "You've been trying to close something that can't be sealed," he continued. "The gate doesn't open from here. It opens from within you. From your memory. From your grief." He pointed at Edric. "You were always the key. You just didn't know it." Edric shook his head, backing toward Inna, who was coughing, her breath short, lips trembling. "I'm not the key," he said, voice low, scared. "I'm just." "You're the one who listened," Oswin said. "The one who dreamed. The one who came back. Your warmth, your guilt, your loss, those are the locks. And you left them open." Inna pulled herself up, clutching the wall. "We're not done," she said. "There's one seal left." She reached into her cloak and pulled out the last item from her box, a small blackened shard. It looked like bone, or maybe wood, but it shimmered with the same strange heat as the blade. "This is your choice," she said to Edric. "The final memory. Burn it, and you cut the connection. Between him and you. Between your grief and the gate." Edric stared at it. He recognized the shard. It was a piece of the chair his mother used to sit in by the fire. The one she'd carved birds into when the nights got long and the food ran low. His last memory of her alive. He clutched the memory ward. His thoughts spiraled. That moment. That chair. That warmth. To Burr it would mean losing her completely. No dreams. No songs. No more frost-shaped smiles in the dark. Just silence. Forever. "You don't have to," Oswin said, though his voice now echoed with Tharn's whisper beneath it. "Keep her. Keep the dream. It's warm here. It's safe. You'll never be alone again." The wind howled through the gate. The frost surged again. The blade in Edric's hand trembled. The shard waited. The moment hung between two worlds, and the gate kept opening. Edric's fingers trembled as he held the shard. The warmth of it seeped into his hand like a fading heartbeat, soft, familiar, almost pleading. This wasn't just a piece of wood. It was the last thing he had of her, something that still smelled faintly of fire and herbs and long winters spent huddled together. Destroying it felt like tearing away the only good thing left from a time before the frost, before the fear, before the silence took root. Anna watched him closely, her face pale but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. This choice wasn't hers. It never had been. It was Edric's alone. Behind them, Oswin, or what wore his skin, took another slow step forward. The frost followed him like a living thing, cracking the stones beneath his feet, coating the walls with a thin sheen of ice that pulsed in time with the gate's heartbeat. He tilted his head at Edric and smiled. "You burned that, and she's gone," he said softly. "Not just from your dreams. From you. Forever. Are you strong enough to carry that silence?" Edric didn't answer. His eyes remained on the shard. He remembered her laughter, rough but warm. The way she used to brush the snow from his shoulders when he came inside after chores. The song she hummed when she thought he was asleep. All of it was in this small piece of wood. Behind him, Maud whimpered. He looked down at her. Her lips were pale, her eyes fluttering shut. The frost had started to spread toward her fingers. It was slow, but creeping, the same way it had taken Oswin. That's when Edric understood. This was never about him being strong. It was about choosing who to save. His memories or Maud. He took a breath, sharp and cold, and raised the shard over the ritual flame Enna had managed to relight. "No," Oswin Tharn hissed. "You don't have to." The shard touched the flame, and for a moment, the chamber lit with golden light. Not frostlight, not spell light, but firelight. The memory itself burned, and Edric saw her, his mother, one last time. Not standing in frost, not whispering from behind a gate, but sitting in the old chair, her hands carving birds into the armrest, smiling softly. Real, warm, alive. Then it was gone. The shard turned to ash, and the gate screamed. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of something ancient and starving, something that had been denied its last meal. The frost surged outward violently, cracking the seals around the chamber as it tried to reclaim what had been lost. But this time, it didn't reach Edric. The glow around him flared. Not from the circle, not from the spell, from him. The memory was severed. The lock had closed. Oswin's form began to flicker, breaking apart like smoke caught in wind. Tharn's voice rose in a shriek, but it no longer echoed everywhere. It was focused now, small, desperate. "You think this ends me?" he growled. "There are other doors, other names. Winter never dies." Enna raised the dagger again. "No," she said firmly, "but it forgets." With one final chant, she plunged the blade into the ground at the heart of the last seal. The stone cracked with a thunderous snap. A wave of heat burst from the center, rolling outward and meeting the frost with violent force. Steam hissed from the floor. Ice shattered. The gate split at its seams. Cracks raced across its surface like lightning through a frozen pond. Tharn's shape roared again, less like a creature now and more like a collapsing thought. His limbs thrashed, tried to hold form, but he was unraveling piece by piece. Behind him, the figures, the false faces, the fake voices, all began to vanish. One by one, quietly, no sound, no protest, just gone. Then the gate imploded. It didn't explode, it sucked inward. The frost was pulled with it. The shadows, the cold, everything Tharn had rooted into their world. Gone in a single breathless second. And then silence. Not the unnatural silence of the winters before. Not the holding its breath silence of a world about to break. Just peace. Still. Real. Edric collapsed to his knees, lungs shaking as he took his first full breath in what felt like days. The chamber was warm again, dimly lit by the flicker of dying firelight. No more frost. No more voices. No more illusions. Maud stirred, curling up in his lap like she used to when she was smaller. Her cheeks had color again. Her lips no longer blue. Enna leaned back against the wall, spent. The dagger clattered from her hand. She looked like she'd aged 10 years in a moment. "Is it over?" Edric whispered. Enna didn't answer at first. Then she nodded. "For now." And for now, that was enough. But far beneath the earth, where the stones still remembered, a single shard of frost flickered once, then vanished. The journey back to the surface felt unreal, like waking slowly from a nightmare you weren't sure had ended. The walls of the tunnel were bare now. The shimmer of the gate, the whispers in the frost, all gone. Just rock and earth and darkness, quiet and cold in the way it used to be. The rope ladder creaked with each pull, but Edric's hands didn't shake. He carried Maud on his back, her small arms draped over his shoulders. She was sleeping now, her breath warm against his neck. He didn't dare wake her. Not yet. She'd seen too much. Enna followed slowly behind, her pace slower, dragging one foot slightly. She hadn't spoken since the seal was completed. Her face looked pale and hollow, like the spell had taken something from her, something personal. The closer they got to the top of the well, the more Edric noticed how still she'd become. Not lifeless, but quiet in the way the land feels after a storm, when even the birds hold their songs. When they emerged, the stars were above them, not veiled behind snow or frost or wind. Just stars, steady and silent in the night sky. The wind had died. The forest around the chapel ruins was still. No cracking ice, no distant echoes, just the soft crunch of their footsteps in the snow. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't, because something was missing. The village was quiet when they returned, but not abandoned. People had begun to step out from their homes again, blinking against the night, confused but awake, as if something had lifted from their minds. A heavy sleep broken. Some wore frost on their sleeves. Others rubbed their arms like they just felt cold for the first time. Edric passed them without words. Everyone watched him carry Maud. Some tried to speak, but stopped. There was a weight in their eyes, too. They knew something had happened, even if they didn't remember what. At Enna's cottage, the fire was still burning. Edric laid Maud gently on the cot and tucked a wool blanket over her shoulders. She stirred only once, murmuring his name. He brushed her hair back, pressing his forehead to hers for a long, quiet moment. "She'll be all right," Enna said behind him. Her soul was pulled toward the gate, but it didn't cross. "The cold will take time to fade, but it will." He turned to her. "And you?" Enna didn't answer right away. She sat beside the fire and reached into her robes, pulling out a pouch. Her fingers trembled slightly. From the pouch, she removed a tiny piece of scorched thread, just a fragment, hardly more than ash. "I saw my daughter in the gate," she said softly. "She died in winter long ago, but in there she was alive, speaking to me, laughing." Edric sat across from her, silent. "I could have stayed," she said. "I could have stepped through and believed it. But the moment you burned that shard, the illusion cracked. I remembered how she really looked. Sick, pale, too thin. She wouldn't have wanted me to follow her into lies." Edric's hands tightened around the memory ward, still warm in his pocket. "Tharn said the door opens from within. That grief, memory, they're what he feeds on." Enna nodded. "Yes, and we all carry grief. All of us. That's why the frost never comes all at once. It seeps in slow, whispers, learns us, waits." "But it's gone now?" he asked. Enna stared at the flames. "Sealed. For now. But the gate is like hunger. You can bury it, starve it. But if the world forgets, if people start to ache again to listen to the wrong memories, it will find its way back." The silence between them held weight. Outside, a faint breeze stirred the trees. The kind of wind that didn't carry voices. Just the cold truth of winter. "You were the key," Enna said. "Not because you were special, but because you remembered. That's what gave it power. But also will let you take it back." Edric looked down at his hands, the cut still healing in his palm. "I wish I could remember her without hurting," he said. Enna gave him a small, tired smile. "That's not how memory works. It hurts because it mattered." Later that night, Edric stepped outside. The sky had cleared fully now. Above the village, the stars were so bright they looked like ice caught in sunlight. He stood there for a long time, watching them, feeling something inside him settle. Not peace, not yet, but the shape of it, Maud called his name softly from inside. Just once. He turned and went back into the warmth. In the quiet that followed, no one noticed the small crack in the chapel well. Hair thin, frozen, faintly pulsing, like something far below had taken one final breath before sleep, and would be waiting for the next winter. Morning broke slowly over the village, light seeping in like a cautious guest after a long, unwelcome storm. The rooftops, once buried in white silence, now bore streaks of exposed wood and stone as the frost began to melt. Icicles dropped in slow drips from the eaves. Smoke curled lazily from a few chimneys, signs of life returning, of people stirring in their homes not because they were called by strange whispers, but because they were waking up hungry and human again. Edric stood outside in his cottage, a worn cloak over his shoulders, watching the sky brighten. His breath still fogged in the air, but the chill didn't bite the same way. His fingers weren't numb. His boots didn't freeze to the earth beneath him. That alone felt like a miracle. Maud was sleeping inside. Real sleep this time. The kind that healed. Anna had checked her pulse, her breath, her eyes, all steady. The frost had receded from her fingertips. A little more color in her cheeks. She had even asked for porridge the night before, which Anna took as the surest sign of recovery. Still, Edric couldn't shake the weight in his chest. He had saved her, but not Oswin. The image of Oswin's face, just before he stepped beyond the circle, kept coming back. Not twisted or monstrous, just confused and a little sad, like he wasn't sure why he believed what he saw, only that it felt real enough to follow. Anna stepped out beside him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She looked tired, but less haunted. There was more light in her eyes than there had been in days. "You didn't sleep," she said, not unkindly. Edric shook his head. "Didn't want to." She looked out at the trees with him. "The land is settling again. It'll take time, but it always does." "Do you think it's really sealed?" he asked. "For now," she replied. "We closed the gate, he came through. But there are other cracks. Some are older than memory. What matters is how we live now. What we remember. What we teach." A few villagers had begun walking toward the chapel ruins, cautiously. Some looked frightened, others curious. No one spoke, just watched the smoke curling from the stones. The ruins would remain. There was no undoing what had happened there, but there was power in remembering it honestly. Edric finally turned to Anna. "I want to know how it started. The first time, you said the gate was buried under the chapel. But who opened it?" She was quiet a long moment. "Long ago," she said, "when the winters were longer and the nights darker, people used to believe warmth wasn't just fire. It was memory, the stories we told, the faces we loved. They believed that if those things were lost, the world would turn cold. Some say the first gate opened when a village let their grief fester too long. They stopped telling the old stories, let their sadness twist inward. The frost came not from the sky, but from the silence inside their homes. And Tharn, he's what grew in that silence. Not a demon, not a god, just hunger, cold that became aware. He doesn't need to chase you. He waits for you to open the door." Edric thought about that for a while. Thought about all the long winters where he'd sat alone, staring into the fire, wishing the past would come back to him. Remembering his mother's voice, not because he loved it, but because he needed it. Because without it, he wasn't sure who he was. "I almost let him in," he said softly. "So did I," Anna replied. A bird chirped from a branch nearby. Small, out of place. It startled both of them. "First one I've heard this winter," Anna murmured. They stood quietly for a while, listening. Later, Edric went to the chapel. Not to rebuild it. He didn't think it should be. Not yet. But to lay stones over the mouth of the well. With Maud still resting, and the village coming slowly back to life, it felt like the one task that mattered. He carried the rocks himself, some larger than his shoulders could manage, others no bigger than a palm. One by one, he stacked them, sealing the circle. As he worked, others joined him. An old man who'd lost his wife to the frost. A young couple who'd nearly stepped into the woods after a phantom child. They didn't speak much, just lifted stones, placed them, nodded. By sundown, the well was no longer a wound. It was a warning and a memory. That night, Edric sat beside Maud as she sipped broth from a cup. She was stronger, her voice clearer. Did it really go away? She asked. For now, he said. But we keep watch. We don't forget. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. She nodded slowly, then asked, Are you going to leave again? He looked down at her small hand wrapped around the cup. The same hand that had once tugged at his sleeve every time he tried to sneak outside alone. The same hand he nearly lost to the cold. No, he said. Not this winter. Outside, the wind stirred again, softer this time. No voices in it. Just trees creaking, snow shifting, and a world starting to breathe again. And in the quiet of Enna's home, the fire burned low, not as a shield against some ancient cold, but as something simple, something sacred. Warmth, not the kind you carry in your hands, but the kind you carry in your heart and stories. And Edric now had both. The days that followed moved slowly, like ice thawing under a watchful sun. The village didn't return to what it had been before, because it never could, but began to feel real again. Sounds came back first, footsteps on dry ground, voices calling across yards, laughter, even if uncertain. After so long trapped in silence and shadow, even the smallest sounds felt like miracles. Edric spent most mornings helping rebuild the communal ovens. The frost had cracked the stones, and the old thatching was brittle and half-collapsed. He didn't mind the labor. It gave his hands something to do while his mind wandered. He found comfort in the rhythm of lifting, stacking, smoothing. There was heat in it, intention, life, the kind of life they had nearly forgotten how to hold. Sometimes Maud came to sit nearby, wrapped in 2 cloaks and holding a mug of warm broth. She was still recovering, but stronger each day. Her voice had come back clearer, and her hands stopped trembling when she ate. She didn't talk much about what she'd seen. Not yet, but her drawings had changed. Edric found one in her room, etched into a scrap of old cloth. It showed the gate, the frost, the pale figures, but also 3 people standing before it holding the light. He tucked the cloth away and didn't ask her about it. Some things, he knew, were best told in time. Enna returned to the woods after the first full thaw. She didn't leave the village, not entirely, but she made her rounds to check the earth, the trees, the old roots where the frost had once taken hold. She left tiny bundles of herbs in corners of barns, and she whispered words into the wind when she passed the well stones. Some villagers gave her space. Others watched with quiet respect. No one questioned her anymore. Not after what they'd seen. One evening, as the sky burned gold with spring's first sunset, Enna found Edric at the edge of the chapel ruins, watching the moss begin to creep between the rocks. Something still troubles you, she said gently. Edric nodded. It's quiet now. Peaceful even. But I keep thinking we didn't destroy it. We just closed the door. We never could destroy it, Enna said. Cold isn't evil, Edric. It's part of the world. It sharpens things, kills things, but it also reminds us what warmth is worth. Tharn is only dangerous when we forget that. He nodded slowly. But what if someone opens it again? What if? I do. Enna studied him carefully, then reached into her satchel and handed him a small bundle wrapped in linen. He opened it and found a single black feather. It shimmered faintly, like frost and firelight. This was left at the gate when it's sealed, she said. No one knows what it means. But it's yours now. Edric turned it over in his fingers. It was light as air, but carried a strange weight in his palm. Why give it to me? Because the gate knew you, she said. And you knew it. That makes you part of its story. If it ever stirs again, this will guide you. Or warn you. Or maybe remind you of what you already know. That night, as stars bloomed across the dark sky, Edric sat by the hearth with Maud curled beside him. The fire crackled gently. He turned the feather over and over in his hands, thinking not of the frost or the fear, but of the silence that almost swallowed everything. He remembered the feeling of forgetting, and how dangerous it had been. He whispered to Maud, though she was already half asleep, "Do you want a story?" She stirred and nodded. So he told her one, not about monsters or magic, but about their mother, about the time she saved a bird from a snowstorm and kept alive with honeyed water and a bit of warm cloth, about the way she used to hum the same tune every night, no matter how bad the day had been. about how even when the food ran out, she always left the last piece of bread for someone else. Maud didn't speak. She just rested her head against him and listened. And when the story ended, she whispered, "Let's remember this one." Edric smiled. "We will." Spring took its time, as it always did, but it came. Green shoots pressed through the frozen ground. Birds returned. The sun lingered longer in the sky each evening, and the village leaned toward life again, carefully but without fear. They had endured a winter unlike any before it. Not just snow and cold, but silence and grief and forgetting. Now, they chose remembering, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, because that was what kept the frost away. And far beneath the earth, where the last echo of Tharn once stirred, there was only stillness. No gate, no whisper, just the weight of closed memory, watched by a single black feather resting in a circle of dust, undisturbed. For now, it was nearly a full season later, when the last of the snow had melted and the trees began to leaf again, that Edric noticed something strange near the edge of the woods. He was walking with Maud, basket in hand, collecting the earliest spring herbs, the same way their mother used to when the thaw came. They'd spent the morning quietly, trading soft words and stories, laughing now and then, letting the warmth of a brighter season carry them. Everything seemed still, safe, but the feeling didn't last. At first, it was just a smell, faint like burning would mix with ice. Then Maud stopped and pointed. At the base of an old ash tree, half hidden by moss, a patch of ground looked scorched. The grass there was gone. The soil was blackened. Frost shimmered around the edges, but it wasn't cold. It pulsed faintly like something alive. Edric's heart sank. He knelt beside it and reached into his coat. The feather Enna had given him, the one left by the sealed gate, had begun to glow, just faintly, a shimmer that caught the sun the wrong way, as if it remembered something before he did. "Maud," he said gently, "go back to the cottage." She shook her head. "No, not again." He didn't argue. Not this time. That night, Edric sat alone at the edge of the woods, staring into the trees. Something deep inside told him this wasn't the same kind of threat they had faced before. It wasn't Tharn clawing his way back through a broken gate. It was subtler, smaller, like a splinter left in flesh, forgotten until it festered. He closed his eyes and listened. There were no whispers, but the silence was too clean. And it came to him the next day with news. Other villages farther north had started to report odd dreams. People waking with frost on their brows. Children speaking in their sleep with voices not their own. It was different from before. Slower, but familiar. "It's not him," she said quietly. "Not exactly, but something remains." Edric nodded. "Then we go to it, before it spreads." Together they returned to the chapel ruins. The well remained sealed, the stones undisturbed. But the warmth that had returned to the earth around it felt thinner, like light through thick fog. Enna placed her hand on the stone and closed her eyes. "He's not trying to open the gate anymore," she said after a long while. "He's trying to grow. Through memory. Through stories." Edric frowned. "Ow!" She opened her eyes. "We buried him in truth. But if people begin to remember him wrong, if they start whispering tales by firelight, making him larger, darker, realer, he becomes something else. Not a frost spirit, not a hunger, a myth. And myths live forever. It wasn't just about forgetting anymore. It was about misremembering. That was the twist. The danger wasn't just in silence. It was in storytelling. If the memory of Tharn twisted into fear, and fear into legend, he would never be sealed again. He would become part of the world's bones, a name passed down in dread. And dread, Edric now understood, was a kind of doorway too. So they made a choice. Enna called a gathering. The whole village came, standing in the long grass as the sun dipped low. Edric stood before them, not with spells or salt, but with a story. He told them everything, not the way a tale is told to entertain, but with bare honesty. He told them what Tharn was, what he had tried to do, what they all nearly lost, and most importantly, why it happened. He told them it wasn't magic that saved them. It was remembering, holding on to truth even when it hurt. At first, people were quiet. Then one by one, they began to share their own parts. The woman who had almost followed her sister into the woods. The boy who remembered a voice calling him by a name no one else knew. The elder who had burned old letters he once thought haunted, but now understood were a warning. They remembered, together, and in doing so, they took the power back from a myth. They gave it shape and ended it. That night, Edric walked home with Maud's hand in his. She looked up at him and asked, "So it's over? Really over?" He smiled. "As long as we remember it right." "Yes." But just as they reached the cottage, a wind passed by. Light, harmless, except for one thing. The feather in his pocket turned cold. And for the first time in weeks, Edric heard a whisper, not from the woods, not from the stones, but from inside himself. It wasn't a threat. It was a memory. His own voice, years ago, calling out for someone lost. And the whisper that answered? It sounded like him. He stood there in the doorway, frozen, not with fear, but with realization. The gate hadn't opened again, but had left something behind. Something he'd have to carry. Not to run from, but to understand. Because even if winter ends, the cold never truly leaves, and the heart remembers everything. The cottage was quiet that night. The kind of quiet that should have been comforting. No wind scratching at the shutters, no frost ticking at the glass. But Edric couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, the feather resting on the table in front of him. It wasn't glowing now. It didn't move. Just lay there, harmless as any scrap of bird. But Edric knew better. Inside him, that whisper hadn't gone away. It didn't speak words. It wasn't Tharn. Not exactly. It was something quieter, more intimate. Like a thought you didn't know you were thinking. A feeling that you couldn't place. It was grief, yes, but shaped like a question. What now? He'd expected closure. After everything. After sealing the gate, saving Maud, telling the story. But instead, he'd been left with something more complicated. Responsibility. Because it wasn't just about surviving a brutal medieval winter anymore. Not even about the ancient cold that nearly swallowed them whole. It was about memory. About truth. About the weight of knowing. He looked across the room where Maud slept soundly, her chest rising and falling beneath layers of wool and linen. She had drawn again that evening. Another scene from their past, but this one was different. It showed their mother, yes, in a warm hearth, but also a shadow standing outside the house. Not pressing in, not threatening, just waiting. Edric hadn't asked what it meant, because deep down, he already understood. The frost hadn't vanished. It had simply taken a new form. And the harsh truth was, it always would. The next morning, Anna returned to the cottage. Her expression was unreadable, but she held something wrapped tightly in cloth. Edric opened the door before she could knock. "I thought you might still be awake," she said. "I haven't really slept," he replied with a tired smile. She stepped inside and unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside was a small mirror, old, the silver backing tarnished at the edges, the wood frame cracked and darkened by smoke. Edric tilted it toward the firelight. For a moment, it showed only his reflection, but then the shadows shifted, and for a breath of a second, the gate appeared. Faint, faded, like a dream barely remembered. "I took this from the ruins," Innes said softly. It wasn't part of the spell work. It was buried under one of the stones. The kind of tool used for watching, or maybe for hiding something. Edric looked up at her. "So, it was never fully gone?" Innes didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "I think part of it is bound to you now. Not as a curse, not as a threat, but as a witness. You were the one who saw it, fought it, survived it. Now, it's tied to your memory. Not to haunt you, but to keep you honest." He nodded slowly. It made sense in a strange way. He'd been the one to open the memory, to light the last seal, to burn the shard. Of course, it would leave something behind. Not every wound closes clean. Anna reached into her pouch again and handed him a folded piece of parchment. "These are instructions. Old ones. If it ever tries to grow again, you'll know what to do." Edric opened the parchment. Symbols. Words he didn't recognize. But he felt them, like distant echoes calling from under snow. "You're not alone," Innes said gently. "You never were. And you don't have to carry this without help." She placed a hand on his shoulder, warm and firm, then turned to leave. But at the door she paused. "There's something else," she said. A man arrived at the edge of the village this morning, from the southern border. Said he heard of what happened. He asked for you by name. Edric's brow furrowed. Who is he? He wouldn't say, she replied. But he wears a crest I've never seen before. A black tower on white cloth. Says he's from a place called the Circle of Lanterns. Edric blinked. He'd never heard the name, but it chilled him more than he expected. Anna continued. He says others have seen the frost. Not here, not now, but far off. And they're looking for those who've faced it and lived. Edric nodded slowly, the meaning beginning to settle. The gate was sealed. The village was safe. But the story had traveled, and with stories come listeners. That evening, Edric met the man. He stood alone by the tree line, wrapped in a thick black cloak. Tall, silent, eyes pale as river ice. Not cruel, not warm, just watching. I know what you are, the man said before Edric could speak. You closed the gate. You touched memory. You held the cold and lived. Edric didn't answer. The man nodded slowly. You're not the only one. Not anymore. He reached into his cloak and handed Edric a simple metal token, etched with a circle around a lantern. No name, no title. When the frost comes again, the man said, you won't be the first to see it. And then he turned and walked into the woods, leaving no prints behind. Edric stood there for a long time, the token cold in his hand. He knew then what the twist truly was. Winter had never just belonged to this village. The frost was older, wider, deeper, and now others were remembering too. The wind returned that night, brushing lightly across the fields, rustling the thatched rooftops and old trees, but it carried no frost, no whispers. Just the hush of a season changing again. Edric sat outside on the low stone wall behind the cottage, the token from the stranger resting in his palm. It was heavier than it looked, not in weight but in meaning. He kept turning it over again and again, as if the motion would somehow help him understand what came next. The Circle of Lanterns, a name that felt like an answer, but also like the start of another question. Behind him, the cottage was quiet. Maud had fallen asleep beside the fire again, arms tucked beneath her head. She'd insisted on keeping the drawings near her cot, some of their mother, others of the gate. One was a simple sketch of Edric, holding a small lantern. He didn't tell her about the man from the trees. Not yet. Let her have her peace a little longer. But peace, Edric had come to realize, was no longer something he could afford to hold for himself. The next day, he walked the full border of the village, alone. The roads were softer now, the frost finally retreating deep into the ground, but his boots still cracked against the old roots hidden under slush and mud. He passed fields being turned over again by tired hands and hopeful hearts. Past the edge of the wood where the frost had once whispered and now stood still. Past the chapel ruins where the stones covering the well were now worn smooth by spring rain. And everywhere he went, people nodded. No one spoke about it directly, but they knew. They didn't ask questions. They just looked at him like someone who had gone somewhere dark and come back changed. By dusk, Edric stood at the river bend, where the water finally flowed freely again. The last of the ice floated downstream, cracked and melting in the current. He watched the river for a long time, the token still in his pocket, and his parchment still folded in his coat. He thought of Oswin, of his mother, of the voices behind the gate, of the way it all could have ended, and nearly did. And then he thought of the stranger, of what it meant that others were seeing frost now too, that other places, other people had stories like his, that this wasn't finished. Not really. The memory ward still hung around his neck. It had dulled since the ceiling, no longer pulsing with grief or fire, but it was there. And somehow he understood it wasn't for protecting himself anymore. It was for remembering what to protect others from. When he returned to the cottage that night, Anna was already there, waiting by the fire. She'd made tea from herbs that only grew after the last frost, the kind they used in stories to mark the turning of the season. She poured him a cup without speaking, then looked at him for a long moment. You're leaving, she said softly. He nodded. She didn't ask where. I don't think it's done, he said. Not here. Not forever. But somewhere else, it's just beginning. She reached into her cloak and placed something on the table. It was the mirror, the one that had shown the gate for a brief moment. Now its surface was clear. Just glass and silver. Take it, she said. If you ever need to know what's true again, look into it. It only shows what's been. He took the mirror, the parchment, and the token. He packed food, spare clothes, left a note from Maud with a promise. Asterisk, I'll come back before the first frost. Always, asterisk. And just before dawn, Edric walked down the old North Road. The same one traders used to come in from, before the winters turned cruel. He didn't know where the circle of lanterns was. Didn't know how many others had seen what he'd seen. But the stories were moving, and he needed to follow them. The road was rough, the air still sharp in the lungs. But the sky ahead was open. And far behind, inside the cottage, Maud stirred in her sleep. She reached for the folded note beside her cot, eyes barely open. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper, then curled around it gently. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. She just whispered, "Don't forget," and let herself sleep again. At the edge of the woods, past where most dared to go, a single lantern glowed faintly against a tree. And Edric kept walking, because winter may be part of the world, but so is the fire that remembers how to hold it back. The forest ahead was unfamiliar. The trees grew closer together than in the woods near Edric's village, their bark darker, their branches tighter knit like long fingers interwoven. Sunlight filtered in less here. Even in early spring, the ground felt cold beneath his boots. Damp leaves clung to the earth, and birdsong was rare. But Edric didn't stop walking. He followed no marked path, only the memory of the man's words. Asterisk, you're not the only one. Asterisk that, and the token in his pocket, a constant weight against his chest. He checked it from time to time, though it never glowed, never changed. Still, he felt something each time his fingers brushed the metal, like a tug in his chest, like direction, like purpose. By the third day, the forest broke open into a hollow where a circle of black stones stood. Ancient, weathered, the kind of stones people used to gather around for reasons long forgotten. Some were cracked. One had fallen, but the circle remained. In the center stood a woman. She wore a cloak of deep blue, fastened with a metal clasp in the shape of a lantern, the same crest as the man who'd come to his village. She didn't look surprised to see Edric. She didn't even turn when he entered the clearing. "I was told you might come," she said, her voice calm, strong. Edric stepped forward slowly. "Then you know who I am?" She nodded. "You closed the gate. The old kind. That's not something many have done and live." He hesitated. "I didn't do it alone." "No one ever does," she said, finally turning. Her eyes were pale, but not cold. Her gaze, steady. "But someone always bears the memory." He looked around the circle. "What is this place?" "An echo," she said simply. "Once, long ago, people stood here to speak the truths no one else would hear. We keep alive. When frost returns or silence seeps in, we remember it here." Edric held out the token. "I was given this. I don't know what it means." "Not fully." She stepped closer and took the token in her hand, running her thumb over its surface. "It means you've seen beyond the edge of the world and didn't look away." Then she handed it back. Another figure entered the clearing, an older man with a long scarf and a limp in his step. Then two more, a woman with gray hair braided down her back, and a young boy no older than Maud, with a quiet, watchful look. All of them wore the lantern crest. Edric didn't speak. He just watched. They nodded at him, not as strangers, but as people who understood something without needing to explain it. The woman in blue, her name was Saren, led them to a small stone building half hidden beneath the hillside. It wasn't grand. It looked more like a stable than a place of learning. But inside, it was warm, lined with shelves of worn books and scrolls, small lanterns flickering in each corner. "They're more like us," she explained as they Saturday, "not many, but enough. People who've seen the frost take shape, not just in snow, but in the spaces between thoughts. People who've walked the edge of forgetting and chosen to remember." Edric listened carefully. It wasn't a group of warriors, or mages, or saints. It was something more powerful, a fellowship of witnesses. People who carried memory like a lantern into the dark. They told him stories that night, quietly, with care. One woman had survived a winter where her village vanished one by one, not from disease, but from belief. They had each begun to trust in a dream that promised warmth if they simply let go. Another had faced a gate in the mountains that didn't open with keys or spells, but with sorrow. He'd nearly walked through it following the voice of his lost daughter. He hadn't, because a stranger held his hand and reminded him of her real name. None of them called what they saw Tharn. That name was Edric's story, but what they described, he recognized it all. The hunger, the illusion, the cold that wasn't just cold, the silence that learned your name. Saren turned to him as the last candle burned low. "You've walked your first gate," she said. "That's what we call it. Most ado don't live, or forget they ever did. But you closed yours. You sealed it. I think I left something behind," Edric admitted quietly. "A voice. A part of me." She nodded. "Everyone does. That's why we're here. To keep each other from forgetting what's real. To remind each other when the shadows shift." He glanced down at the token again. "Is this a calling?" "No," Saren said. "It's a choice." The next few days were spent in quiet work. They taught Edric how to map dream roads, paths people walk when they're not fully asleep, but no longer awake. They showed him how to track the cold, not in the weather, but in the weight of a room. How to tell when a story was turning into a door. He shared what he knew, too. About the gate. About the circle of ash. About Maud and Enna and the truth behind the frost. He even showed them the mirror. They studied it closely, took notes, added its story to their scrolls. But he didn't give it away. It was his memory, after all. Then, just before he planned to return home, Saren gave him one last thing. A new token. This one was different. Etched not with a lantern, but with a closed eye. "What is this?" he asked. "For when you're alone," she said. "When no one else believes what you've seen. It's a reminder, what we carry isn't always for others to see. But it's still real." Edric left the clearing that morning with a pack full of parchment, 2 tokens, and a promise to return. Not just if the frost returned, but before it did. The road home was longer than he remembered, but he didn't mind. Each step felt more certain than the last. Not because he was fearless, but because he understood now. It was never about defeating winter. It was about refusing to forget the warmth. The road curved gently along a hillside dusted with the last touches of frost. Edric paused at the top, looking down over the valley where his village lay. Smoke curled up from a few chimneys. The fields were greener now, and children ran along the thawing riverbank, chasing after birds and skipping stones. Spring had come. He hadn't been gone long by the measure of the sun, perhaps 2 full moons. But time had stretched differently for him, thickened by stories, memory, and a weight he now understood wasn't a burden, but a duty. In his pack were the parchments, the tokens, and the mirror. But more than that, he carried something invisible yet heavier than stone. Knowledge. As he descended into the village, people noticed him. Some waved. Others smiled with the quiet recognition of someone returning from a journey no one could name. No one asked where he had been. They didn't need to. They saw it in his eyes. He had gone beyond the winter. He reached Enna's cottage just as the sky began to burn gold with evening. The door was open. The hearth was glowing. And Maud was inside, bent over a piece of parchment, drawing again. When she saw him, she didn't run. She just looked up and smiled, as if she had always known he'd come back. "I saved your place by the fire," she said, pointing to the cushion where he used to sit. Edric stepped in and set his pack down. He felt his shoulders ease in the warmth of the room, in the quiet hum of safety. "Did you keep the stories alive?" he asked gently. Maud nodded. "I told one every night, even hard ones." He smiled. "That's good. That's how we keep the frost from finding a way in." Enna stepped into the room behind him, wiping her hands on a cloth. She looked him over, studying his face the way someone might study a storm cloud, watching for signs. "You saw more than we thought was out there," she said. Edric nodded. "There are others. Villages like ours. People like us. Some didn't survive. Some did. All of them remember something that shouldn't exist." She handed him a warm mug of tea. "Did they give it a name?" "No," he said. "They had many names for it. But it's the same thing. Cold that isn't weather. Hunger that wears your voice." Enna sat beside him. "Did you find a way to stop it?" He stared into the mug, watching the steam rise. "No," he said, "but I found a way to hold it back. Together. That's what matters." He reached into his coat and placed the second token on the table, the one with the closed eye. Anna raised an eyebrow. "It's for when no one believes you," Edric said. "When the cold tries to convince you it was never there. That you imagined it. That you dreamed it." Maud looked at the token carefully, then said, "It's like a memory you wear." Edric smiled. "Exactly that." That night, as the wind whispered gently across the rooftops, Edric told Maud a new story, one he had heard from Saren's group, passed down by others who had lived through their own winters. It was about a boy who heard singing from beneath the ice and nearly followed it. He told her how the boy stopped, not because he was strong, but because someone called his name from behind him. A real name. A name full of life, not longing. When he finished, Maud was already asleep, curled in her blanket, clutching her newest drawing. This one showed people standing in a circle, each holding a lantern high against a shadow shaped like wind. Edric tucked her in and stepped outside into the crisp night air. Stars stretched across the sky. The moon hung low, soft and steady. He listened for anything strange, any distant whisper, any hint of cold that wasn't part of the season. But there was nothing, only the breath of spring and the faint sound of a stream nearby. He reached into his pocket and touched the token again, then the memory ward around his neck. It was enough. For now. Because the truth about the frost wasn't that it always returned. It was that when it did, it came quietly, through silence, through forgetting, through stories twisted by fear. And the only real shield against it wasn't magic or might. It was memory, honest memory, and people willing to share it. He closed his eyes and made a quiet promise. When the cold comes again, we'll be ready. And this time, we won't forget. Spring settled gently across the village like a long exhale after years of holding breath. The snow melt filled the streams, soft grass pressed up through the thawed soil, and the smell of fresh wood smoke and herbs drifted from hearths that no longer burned only to keep the cold out, but to welcome warmth in. Edric spent his days among the villagers now, fixing fences, helping mend a roof on the meeting house, and teaching Maud how to trace plants that only grew in the new light of spring. There was quiet joy in the ordinary work of it, a steady peace in knowing each day was no longer borrowed from fear. The cottage had changed in small ways. The feathers still hung above the hearth, but not as a warning now, more as a reminder. The mirror Enna had given him remained tucked into a wooden box, only opened when Edric needed to remind himself that memory wasn't something you left behind. It was something you carried, like a map or a lantern in the dark. Maud's drawings, once shadowed with figures from half-remembered dreams, now glowed with color. She still drew the gate sometimes, but always with people standing before it, together, holding hands, facing it with their backs to one another. She no longer feared it. She understood it. Edric had kept in touch with the circle, exchanging letters through travelers and old messengers who passed through. Saren's words came with folded herbs or tiny tokens, small gestures of trust that reminded him he was not alone. He hadn't yet gone back to their stone circle in the woods, but he knew he would one day. When needed, people still asked about that winter, especially the younger ones, those who were too small to remember the worst of it. They asked about the snow that never melted, about the people who had wandered into the woods and never come back. Edric never lied to them, but he didn't make the stories frightening either. He told them honestly how forgetting made the cold stronger, how silence fed it, and how truth, shared and held, could keep even the oldest frost from creeping in. The chapel ruins were never rebuilt. No one wanted to pretend the gate hadn't been there. Instead, the villagers planted a circle of ash trees around it, not to hide the past, but to grow something from it. Each spring, flowers bloomed along the outer stones, wild and small, untouched by frost. Children played there now, never too close, but never afraid. It had become a place for storytelling, a place where memory lived in roots and sunlight instead of ice. Maud, curious as ever, had begun asking deeper questions, not just about the frost or the gate, but about the people who came before, who first walked this land, what names they spoke, what winters looked like long before her brother was born. Edric did his best to answer, and when he didn't know, he showed her how to search. He taught her the old symbols on the parchment from the circle, helped her sound out the words that described frost not as a season, but as a spirit of forgetting. One afternoon, as they sat near the stream, Maud asked, "Do you think the cold will ever come back again?" Edric looked up at the sky, watching a single hawk circle far above the hills. He thought about the whisper that once echoed inside him. The gate, the mirror, the stranger who left no footprints. "It might," he said, "but if it does, we'll remember what to do." "Will I?" she asked, looking unsure. He turned to her and smiled. "Yes, because you've already started." It wasn't dramatic or final, but that was the truth of life after a brutal medieval winter. The frost didn't leave with a roar. It faded with the smallest acts of remembering. A story retold, a hand held, a truth passed down without fear. And Edric, who had once stood alone before a hunger born of silence, now stood among many. Not a hero, just someone who chose not to forget. As the sun dipped below the hills that evening and shadows stretched across the soft grass, the warmth didn't leave with the light. It lingered, in the firelight, in Maud's steady laughter, in the way the villagers hummed to themselves as they carried in the last of the firewood. Not because they feared the night, but because it was what they'd always done. The winter had been cruel, the cold had been brutal, but the people were not broken. They had endured, and now they remembered not just the pain, but the strength it took to keep walking through it. That was what kept the frost away. And in the quiet peace of that long spring evening, Edric whispered to himself the last words of story he would carry always. The cold may return, but so will we. Asterisk with memory, with truth, with light, asterisk. And so the village slept, not in fear, but in warmth, and the lantern stayed lit.